Hi Raptor fans! Welcome to the Montana Raptor Conservation Center in Bozeman, Montana. My name is Teresa and I am the Education Specialist here at the Raptor Center. And today we are going to be talking about hawk identification. So if you've been watching our videos, you've likely met this bird before. This here is Sammy. But if you haven't met her and you're not quite sure what species she is, I will go ahead and turn her around so you can get a good look at her tail. There you go. Now you might have noticed it's a beautiful brick red color, and that's a good way to tell that you are looking at a red-tailed hawk. Now this hawk here is one of the most common hawks you can find here in the United States. So you have probably seen one of these hawks, especially if you are taking a long drive near open country, near some open fields. It's a really good place to see these hawks in the wild. Now the tricky thing with red-tailed hawks is that they're found all over the place. Oh, we're getting nice and poofy. There we go. I was waiting for that. That was what's called a rouse. That's what birds will do to shake out any dust or dirt that might be in their feathers. It's a good sign that Sammy's extra comfortable today on glove. Nice and chatty and very chill. Now, these birds found all over the U.S. actually come in 13 different subspecies, and of course these subspecies all look a little different. And in their subspecies they have what's called different color morphs. So Sammy here is actually a bit of a dark morph red-tailed hawk. Now she's not actually more intermediate than a solid dark. Typically dark morphs will have a darker belly. You can see that she has very dark brown head and back, and on the backs of her wings, but on her chest she has lots of brown streaking and a little bit lighter color brown tan on her legs and her underbelly. So that's kind of a good way to tell you're looking at a darker morph, whereas the light morph and a lot of the red-tailed hawks you'll see around here actually have a bit more of a white belly with a dark belly band. It kind of looks like a belt going around the kind of lower part of their belly. Now that can get really, really tricky when you're trying to ID these birds from afar. So a really good way to know what type of raptor you're looking at is looking at their wing shape and at their tail shape, and also looking how they utilize their flights. So Sammy here is a Beauteo Hawk, and Beauteos have wide, broad wings with a large fan-like tail. And you can kind of see behind me, up above Sammy's head, is a Pherogenous Hawk, and it's showing you a really good example of the Beauteo body, wing, and tail shape. And all of those come into play with how these birds typically hunt. So a lot of times they're what's called perch and pounce hunters. So you can really see them sitting on top of tall utility poles on the side of the road or maybe on a fence post. And they're going to sit and use their amazing eyesight to look for their prey a long distance away. And they're going to wait until it comes close enough for them to swoop down and snag their prey and pounce on it. But when they're looking for good hunting grounds or mating grounds, or they're kind of switching out their spot or maybe finding a place to roost for the evening, they will be seen soaring, especially near open fields. And that's where you'll see those big, broad wings and fan-like tail in its full use. They're going to do lots and lots of soaring to help minimize the amount of energy that they have to use while they're flying. Now, when they're soaring, they're going to often be using things called thermals. They're warm pockets of air that kind of form a column as it rises in the air, and that will allow them to sit above this warm air and soar for those long periods of time. They also often will use updrafts off of mountains and off the ocean, and those updrafts allow them to do kind of the same thing as thermals, soar on top of those different wind currents, giving them an easy ability to soar and fly without using lots of energy. So Beauteos often will be utilizing those different wind currents. And so if you're looking near a big open field and you see those broad wings and a fan-like tail, you're probably looking at a Beauteo. Now, of course, here in Montana, we have a lot of different types of Beauteos, and we also have a few different color morphs of the red-tailed hawks. Yeah, very good. So we've got darker ones like Sammy here, but we also have the light morphs. And I'm actually going to scooch, oh, nice poop, out of the picture here. You can see, hopefully, right here is kind of the typical coloration you're going to see on the red-tailed hawk. When they're soaring, you should be able to see at least a little bit of that red tail shining through, but it's often a little bit more pale on the bottom of their tail. And then you can see right at the kind of almost to the edge of their wings, they have darker colored feathers, and then their dark colored wing tips, and at the base of their secondary feathers right here. Also, the leading edge of their wings have dark lines as well. And that'll be really good things to look for when you're trying to ID these birds. You can also see a little bit of a belly band. So that hawk right there is a slightly more lighter morph than Sammy, so you can't see the belly band quite as much. Now right here is also a red-tailed hawk. So this is when it gets even trickier. This is a juvenile red-tailed hawk. So they don't get that brick red tail color until they're about 2 to 3 years old. So when they're really young, they actually have a bit more barring, brown barring on their tails. And they have oftentimes a lot more spotting on their belly and on their wings. They also change color in their feet and on their cere, which is the skin around their beak. So they look quite a bit different than their adult counterparts. So it can be kind of tricky when you're looking at a juvenile versus an adult. And then here are some perch red-tailed hawks for you to kind of compare to the soaring. Here's the brick red tail. You can see the dark belly band, the darker head, and darker back. And these ones are going to be the more typical kind of light color morphs that you will see oftentimes when you're looking for red-tailed hawks. And Sammy has a lot to say about that. Now, Sammy here is one of our education ambassadors. She was actually found as a nestling at the base of her nest on the ground. We believe she injured her wing and her eye in a fall out of her nest. So she is a permanent resident here at the Raptor Center, and she is an amazing education ambassador. We're so lucky to have her. If you have any questions about IDing red-tailed hawks or questions about Sammy, please place them in the comments below. Okay, everybody. Now, once again, if you've been watching our previous videos, you've probably already seen this handsome man. His name is Chaco, and I'm going to be giving him some snacks while he's out here, which he's very excited about. And Chaco, you can see, is pretty different than Sammy. You can probably see right off the bat, he's quite a bit smaller. He's almost as chatty as Sammy. They have that in common. But he's quite a bit smaller. Now in raptors, typically the males are going to be smaller than the females. So Sammy is a female red-tailed hawk, and Chaco is a male Swainson's hawk. So Swainson's hawks, like a female Swainson's hawk, would still be a little bit smaller than Sammy, likely, whereas Chaco here is going to be smaller than a male red-tailed hawk. So he is pretty petite, but these hawks are a little bit smaller in general. You can see he has kind of smaller feet, smaller beak, a little bit finer features than Sammy does. But of course that can kind of be hard to use as ID features because these birds are often very far off in the distance. A really good way to tell a Swainson's hawk from a red-tailed hawk is that nice white beard you can see underneath Chaco right there. Kind of looks like a Santa beard. So much to say. And that can be really helpful. You can also see he's got a dark bib right underneath that beard. Kind of like he's a messy eater. He needs to wear a bib to clean that up. So that dark bib and that light white Santa beard is going to be really helpful. But, of course, there are different color morphs in Swainson's hawks. There are dark morphs that actually don't typically have that white beard, and it's very hard to see the dark bib. Also, there are intermediate morphs like Chaco. Here you can see he's kind of got a little bit tannish brown color on his chest and on his legs, or on his belly. Whereas the light color morphs, you want this piece? They have very, very white bellies and legs. So that's a little tricky, but at least there's not 13 subspecies like with the red-tailed hawks. So it gets a little bit easier with these guys. They are also Beauteos, just like the red-tailed hawks. So they have those broad, wide wings, and they also have the fan-like tail when they're soaring. So right next to Chaco, you can see on his left, you can see a Swainson's hawk perched right behind him, and that's going to be more of that white, light-colored morph, where they've got the white belly and the white legs. But you can see they have that white Santa beard and that dark bib, very easy to see. And they are perch and pounce hunters as well, so you'll often see them perching on telephone poles and on posts when they are on the side of the road, on a fence maybe. And then directly behind Chaco on his right, you can see a soaring Swainson's hawk. You can get a really good look at how dark the secondary and primary feathers are. So kind of the edges of his wings are very, very dark, whereas the leading edge, the front of his wings, are much more light. And they don't have that nice dark bar on the leading edge, kind of like the red-tailed hawks do. They don't have that on the front of their wings. So that can be really helpful. Also, they don't have brick red tails. So that can be something that can really help you out. Of course, it's hard to think about the juvenile red-tailed hawks versus Swainson's hawks versus juvenile Swainson's hawks. So that can all get kind of tricky. Now, one thing that I highly recommend is looking at pictures like these and try to continue to get a good solid idea in your mind, because when you're looking at that bird, odds are you might be driving or it might be soaring in and out of view, so it's kind of tricky to get a good visual on it. So the more you look at these pictures, especially of them soaring long distances away, the better you are going to get at IDing these birds. Another snack? There we go. And of course, if they're perched on a pole next to you, you're very, very lucky, and that can give you a good span to get a good idea of their body shape and size. So Swainson's hawks being a little bit smaller, that might help you out. Also, right now, Chaco is kind of sitting forward a little bit. That is a good way to tell you're looking at a hawk. A lot of times falcons will sit up just a little bit more straight. They have a bit more of a sleek body shape than even hawks do. And then of course when they're flying, falcons definitely have a different flight. When you see these birds soaring, they're often going to do kind of a flap glide form, and then if they don't have to flap, if there's wind or thermals or updrafts, they'll do lots and lots of soaring. What otherwise you're going to be seeing like falcons doing diving or lots of flapping to get some good altitude. So falcons and hawks do have a quite different way of flying and way of hunting. Now, another good thing to do to ID these birds is get used to their sounds. So Chaco is definitely giving you a good, or was giving you a good example of Swainson's hawk sounds. They have kind of that high-pitched scream, whereas red-tailed hawks are a little bit more of a shrill sound, and sometimes even a little bit more of a scratchy tone. And that kind of high-pitched peeping that you heard Sammy do, they'll also be doing that, especially when they're around their mate or around their young. So definitely take a good listen to these birds' sounds that they make, because sometimes you can hear them before you can even see them, and that'll give you a really good idea of what type of hawk you're about to look at. Another thing that can be really helpful is looking at videos of the way that they fly, because all of these birds have an extremely different flight. But one thing that I've found really helps me is looking at the colorations and looking at the shape of their head, the way that they perch, the size of their body. Those are kind of the best ways for me to ID. Now, if you look behind Chaco, right above him is a Pherogenous Hawk. And you can see it has a very light belly, light under tail, and under its wings it's very light. It does have that darker leading edge on its wings, but it also has a rufous kind of reddish brownish color on their legs. And right now with it soaring, it looks kind of like a V. And with the light morph Pherogenous Hawks, they have that really, really stunning red color to their legs that's really easy to see. There are dark morph Pherogenous Hawks. Those are often a little bit more rare to see, so it can be harder to see their rufous legs in the dark morphs. Now behind Chaco up here is a rough-legged hawk. Now the nice thing with rough-legged hawks is we actually only get them in the winter time. They're a special treat for us in the winter. And so if you are in the middle of summer and you're like, oh, wonder what hawk that is, you know in Montana you can rule out a rough-legged hawk unless it's being a very, very weird summer. Another thing with rough-legged hawks is the females often have those white light heads and then very, very dark chests and bellies. Another thing that I commonly look at with rough-legged hawks are those dark patches you see at their elbows of their wings, right there and right there. Those are excellent cues because the male rough-legged hawks actually have slightly lighter, more streaked bellies, and their heads are often more light and streaked than the females. But they still have those dark patches at the elbow of their, the wrist of their wings. So right there and right there, you can see that Swainson's hawks don't have them, Pherogenous hawks don't have them, and red-tailed hawks don't have them. So that can be very, very helpful for IDing different Beauteos in this area. Now Chaco here is 19 years old. He hatched in 2001, and he actually hatched with a deformed humerus. So his humerus, the bone right here on his wing, did not grow correctly, and so he's never been able to fly. He was found in Great Falls, Montana, and was brought to the center, and he has been an amazing education ambassador ever since. We love having Chaco here at the center. If you have any questions about Beauteo Hawks, Chaco, or Swainson's hawks, please make sure to put them in the comments below. So we have talked in great detail about the types of hawks in Montana called Beauteo Hawks, and those are the ones with the broad wings and the fan-like tail. So you're going to see these birds soaring near open fields, and they're often found in sitting on top of fence posts or electrical posts, and they're looking for their prey, and then they're going to perch and pounce on it. And you can see behind me, here's a couple really good examples of where you will find these birds. But in Montana, we have another type of hawk called an accipiter hawk. Accipiters have thin wings. They're not quite, they're a little more rounded on the edges, and then their tails are thinner, longer, and they act a little bit more like a rudder rather than like a big fan. Now, these birds are going to commonly be found in forested areas. They're not going to be seen often near open fields. They're very good bird hunting birds, so they need to be extremely agile, and they're very skilled at using their rudder-like tail to fly in between trees. And oftentimes people will see accipiters hanging out near their bird feeders. So not everybody likes accipiters, but they're some pretty cool birds. So here in Montana, we have three types of accipiters. There's the sharp-shinned hawk, which is the smallest one, Cooper's hawk, which looks a lot like the sharp-shinned hawk, but is a little bit bigger, and then the Goss Hawk, which is the biggest accipiter we have in Montana. And behind me, I actually have the three different types of accipiters on the bottom row. Here is a Goss Hawk, and this is an adult. It has lots of bars and stripes going on, and it has a dark stripe right over its eyes. And you can get a really good look at those thinner wings with the rounded edges. Now this bird also has that really nice long tail. They're excellent bird hunting birds. Now next to it is the Cooper's hawk, and right here is the sharp-shinned hawk. Now these pictures are not to size, so that doesn't really help you with size. But you can see they look very similar. The Cooper's hawk here has kind of an orangish rufous colored striping on it with the darker cap, the darker back, and that long striped thin tail. But if you look at the sharp-shinned, they also have that kind of rufous striping on it. Here in Montana, that is, these actually have multiple different subspecies as well. They have that dark gray cap, dark back, and the long, thin, striped tail. But one thing that oftentimes you may notice is Cooper's hawks tend to have a more rounded edge to their tail. So you can see some of these tail feathers on the edges are a little bit shorter than the ones near the middle. Whereas with the sharp-shinned hawks, they typically have a bit more of a square tail. So you can see the edge feathers are almost as long, or maybe even sometimes a little bit longer than the middle tail feathers. Now that is very, very hard to see when these birds are swooping right past you. It's hard to see the shape of their tail. So one thing that can be really helpful is Cooper's hawks are typically a little bit bigger than sharp-shinned hawks. So that can help you out quite a bit. These are the birds you're often going to find near your bird feeders, hunting for other birds. They're excellent hunters, and they highly rely on their thin, long tails to help them maneuver really, really quickly. You can also see they have very long, thin toes and long, thin legs, which are going to be very helpful for darting out, grabbing their prey, and those long, thin toes are going to be helpful for holding on to a bird if they're trying to eat it. Whereas Beauteos, they often have shorter toes. They're a little bit thicker. So let's say you're looking out and you see a hawk sitting on your fence in your backyard and you see those long, thin toes. That'll be something that can really, really help you out. But of course, their flight is very, very different. They do lots of darting, fast, quick flights. They don't do lots of soaring, and they are often, if you do see them kind of soaring near a field, it'll be kind of a flap glide type of flight that they do. Now, there are many, many, many different hawk species out there in the United States. Luckily, here in Montana, we have some pretty amazing species, and IDing them can get very tricky, especially with the younger juvenile hawks. They don't have their adult plumage typically in their first years of life, so that can be hard. Those different color morphs, those different subspecies, and accipiter versus Beauteo, those can all have a part to play on IDing hawks. But the more you pay attention to these birds, the more you think about where you're looking for them, the more you think about what time of year it is, all these things will help you with your IDing trip and your learning journey. I highly recommend looking at books that have pictures of birds far, far away. Make sure if you're looking up these birds online that you are getting the bird species mixed or matched with the picture correctly. Sometimes they're not correctly labeled. So if you're looking at pictures of hawks online, make sure to look at sources that really, really know their stuff about birds, because that will help make sure you're getting the right idea. But I definitely think that you're on a good start if you're watching this video, and the more that you look at pictures and videos and listen to their sounds, the better you will get. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about this video, please put them in the comments below, and I hope you learned a lot about IDing hawks in Montana. Have a great rest of your day. See ya!